Shout out to all of you who voted for the PMC video to come next. I thought I was the most skilled gambler on earth, and as it turns out, I am not. I lost my 50-50. I'm currently at 50 pity. I'll get her by the end of the patch, but the Citlali video isn't coming for a little bit. Hello! I made a mistake. I thought this team had Pyro Traveler in it. It does not. Okay, here it is. I'm also gonna go over here. After 4 months of waiting and lots of speculation, we finally have our hands on Pyro Traveler, and I am thoroughly whelmed. This is an okay character, and honestly, for a Traveler, I think okay is as best as we're ever gonna get. Some things work better than I thought, some things work worse than I thought. Overall, the character is fine. Most of their strength lies in the fact that they can be a scroll holder. A scrollder, if you will. The TLDR of this video is that Pyro Traveler is okay. He is basically the exact same as Dendro Traveler, where he can put in some decent work. He has some okay buffs and does okay personal damage. The kit works. Unlike something like Hydro Traveler, or even to an extent Geo Traveler, this is a very functional kit, and he is competitive in several teams. Enough talk, let's just look at what he does. Again, normal attacks, they're usually useless. We'll skip over it for now. The main part of Pyro Traveler's kit is their elemental skill. I'm gonna have to go fight a boss to show this off. I really don't know why I showed it off here. The tap skill is arguably the weaker version, but they do both have their uses. This one summons a little ring of fire around Pyro Traveler, and when he gets close to enemies, it will pulse and deal damage. The hold version does a bit of pyro damage on its cast. Oof. He gets pretty strong interruption resistance, as you can see, and from there it's a coordinated attack. When you hit enemies, it'll trigger. They have the same rate of application because the tap version applies on every other hit and hits every 1.5 seconds, whereas the hold version hits every 3 seconds but applies pyro every hit. I actually do want to talk about something that I mentioned in my last video, is that I said Pyro Traveler might feel significantly more clunky than Mavuika. And I can't speak to Mavuika because obviously I don't have her. In my experience, Pyro Traveler hasn't really felt very clunky at all with their hold skill, because what they kind of do for both their hold and their tap skill is they go into this position where they're about to raise their hand. The tap version, it just does this kind of little half-hearted yeah. But if you hold it, then he does the full like Power Rangers power of friendship. Yeah! And there is a little bit of end lag to that fist pump because you can't cancel out of it until after it happens. But I don't know, I've heard complaints, so I thought it was something that I should bring up, but it has not been an issue for me. Anyways, moving on to the other stuff of note in his kit. You might have noticed that whenever I use my skill, he uses Night Soul points like every other Natlan unit, but his bar doesn't go to full. It only goes to around half. You can see that the maximum limit is 80, but when he summons it, both the tap and hold version only gain him 42 Night Soul points. So there must be other things that you can do to make him gain Night Soul points, right? Yeah, of course there are. The first thing is his burst. It's really, really simple. All it does is it does a big hit of damage, which this scaling is actually very significant. I wouldn't ignore this. For 4 seconds, you'll get 7 Night Soul points a second, totals to 28. And it actually, interestingly enough, it still regenerates the Night Soul points outside of your skill, if you're not in your skill state. But 28 plus 42 is still not 80. That's only 70, but we won't get quite into that yet. Subtle foreshadowing. Anyways, so he's kind of reliant on this, and that 70 energy burst isn't cheap. Pyro Traveler is a bit of an energy-hungry character, right? Not really. The first thing that negates some of his energy needs is Embers Unspent, his Ascension 4 passive. Triggering a pyro-related reaction is basically not a condition because that's what Pyro Traveler is there for. This effect can occur once every 12 seconds. His maximum Night Soul state, 12 seconds, so this basically means once a rotation. He also gets 4 energy from Night Soul Burst. This is like a minimum 61 cost burst, which is already decently down from 70. Passive talent number 1 increases the AoE of his skill when you're above 20 Night Soul points. It's not really something that's noticeable to me. It's like if you have it, you have it. If you don't, you don't. I guess I can just straight up show it off. The hold version, pretty big explosion, and then below 20, a little bit smaller. Not significant. It actually, That's even less noticeable, in my opinion. And moving on to his constellations, I'm actually going to give a small spoiler warning. I'm not going to name any names, and I'll blank them out if they appear on screen. No characters or anything. But I am going to go over some basic stuff in the story, because I kind of have to look at his constellations. Timestamp on screen if you care that much. With the end of every Archon quest chapter comes a new weekly boss. That's not a big surprise. When we fight the Natlan weekly boss, that is when you unlock Pyro MC, and also technically all of their constellations. But all the constellations that you unlock here start with the caveat, when opposing the new weekly boss. You say when opposing, when opposing. So these original 6 constellations only activate when you're facing that weekly boss. 99% of the time, these constellations do literally nothing. What you see below all of them, below this little line, those are the real constellations. Basically those blazing flint ore items that everyone thought were Pyro Traveler's constellations, sort of are. When you finish the story, you'll unlock this location, the Throne of Primal Fire, and what you can do is go there, and if you offer up your blazing flint ores, then your constellations will be upgraded and gain these secondary effects, which these are the actual constellations, and they are appropriately pretty bad. 20% pyro damage bonus, of course levels on the skills, which aren't very important. Little tiny percent damage boost. 6%. The tiniest buff in the universe, a 6% damage buff, but it actually goes up to 15 if your character's from Natlan. The big constellation is C2. Within 12 seconds of using the elemental skill, after a nearby party member triggers a pyro reaction, Traveler will regain 14 Night Soul points. As I said, that's a free condition. You don't have to even think about it. That is why Pyro Traveler is here. So this constellation, it basically boosts his base Night Soul point generation from 42 to 70. And then from there, the burst is more of just a nice extra thing. It can get you a little more duration out of your skill, but I haven't found it to be wholly necessary like it was before getting the C2 upgrade. And also the thing that I've spent a little bit of time dancing around is Pyro Traveler's C6. We don't have it yet. According to leaks, it is a pyro infusion when you're in your Night Soul state, plus a 40% crit damage bonus, which that's not nothing, but the characters who get infusions with their C6, the real 5-star characters who get that, they also all get increased scaling with their normal attacks, because frankly, none of these characters were built to be normal attackers, and they need that extra scaling if they want their damage to be reasonable. So when C6 comes out, don't expect Pyro Traveler to become a fantastic on-fielder. I think it's going to be more of a Lynette situation. She does get that Animo infusion at C6, but she's not an Animo on-fielder. That's more used to trigger swirl reactions and stuff like that. But I think the C6 is mostly just going to be useful if you have a case where you need an on-fielder who applies a lot of pyro. I don't really want to talk about it too much, because if we follow current patterns, we're not getting C6 Pyro Traveler for another few months. Constellations are upgraded with Blazing Flint Ore, which is gotten through the tribal reputation system, so until we get the Collective of Plenty, which is looking to happen in 5.5, we're not getting this constellation. And I did not want to wait that long to make PMC 101. So there we go. That's the very basic rundown of how he works. Oh. Whoops. Let's go to the Statue of 7 and then show off a few teams. This is the first team that I thought of when theory crafting different Pyro Traveler teams. In case you didn't realize by now, I really like Wriothesley and I really like Emilie. And because Cryo and Dendro don't interact, what this team allows me to do is get both auras on the enemy and then trigger them both at the same time with Pyro Traveler, which grants us, of course, both the damage bonuses. This is a team structure that I've been playing for a decent amount of time now. I've run a lot of Toma and Dea in the past as my off-field Pyro units. Pyro Traveler finally offers an offensive option in that slot, whereas before we only really had defensive, and because you already have Bennett, you don't need another defensive slot. Here we have it, team number 1. It's really not anything special. It's just a team where he's holding scroll and he can make good use of it. The second team that I have been working on here is more of the same, asterisk. This is a somewhat similar situation, but it is a little bit different because of how the scroll set works. It requires the unit holding the scroll set to be the one triggering the reaction, and in case you weren't aware, adding more pyro to burning does not trigger burning again. Only more dendro does that, which means that you have to have a raw dendro aura on the enemy and then have pyro MC hit that enemy for them to get the buff. Pure kinich burning doesn't work that well with the scroll set, and you're heavily incentivized to go towards burgeon. Anyways, I'm just gonna actually do my rotation this time. I chose to talk about this team because the requirements are admittedly a little awkward. I think that's fun, but I can kind of see how other people would not like that. Because Kinich is stuck wanting 4 things and he only has 3 teammates. He has his scroll holder, Pyro MC in this situation, and to make good use out of scroll, you need to make a burgeon team, so you need a hydro. And finally, for his res shred, you need deepwood, which I've chosen to go with Emilie because she can make pretty good use of it herself as well. But that's the thing, you could go Bennett this slot to have better defensive utility and also get some more damage out of your Kinich, but in that case, you're skipping out on deepwood. So while this is a little awkward, I did want to show it off because it is a Bennett-less Kinich team, and it feels pretty good and still does a lot of damage. While you're still giving up on Bennett and the comfort and damage that he provides, you're also buffing Emilie, which Bennett doesn't do. You have Xingqiu's damage going on, you have Burgeon stuff going on. It's not the easiest team in the world, but if you wanted free, easy teams, I wouldn't recommend going for Kinich in the first place. Next up, I'm just going through all the carries that I want to talk about here. Next up is Overload, which is one of the things that I was kind of most excited for. This, I might go back to the artifact domain because I've been playing it to farm artifacts and I've had fun with it. So this is a team where it's kind of funny because Pyro Traveler isn't the focus. He's not doing a ton himself. In fact, he's not even on scroll in this team because Ororon is on scroll, and it only works once. He's on tenacity, but it is still vitally important that he is here because Ororon works in one of 2 ways. He can either deal damage when Electrocharge is triggered, or when Night Soul Align damage is triggered. Or dealt, my bad. So it's not Pyro Traveler himself in this team that's doing much, but he allows Ororon to work, which Ororon, of course, deals a lot of damage himself and also holds the scroll set because in this team, it's majority Pyro. Enemies are going to tend to have Pyro auras on them, so Ororon is the one triggering overloads. Ow. I'm actually just going to do the tap of Pyro Traveler's skill in this team. I have to be very close, which Linny does not like at all, but I do get more triggers on Ororon, it seems like. Yay. And unlike the last team, this is actually a team where I think Mavuika would be a very significant upgrade to Pyro Traveler. I'm using Linny because I like Linny, but presumably if you pulled Mavuika, you like her, and you can then use her as your on-fielder. PMC in this team is really only there to activate Ororon, which Ororon is good enough that I think is worth it to dedicating a whole slot to just making him work. But if you have Mavuika, she can fill your condition of dealing Night Soul damage and also be your on-fielder, which opens up another slot to deal damage for someone like Xiangling, Bennett, Fischl. But even without Mavuika, I think that Chevreuse, Ororon, and Pyro Traveler are a pretty solid base for basically any Pyro or Electro carry that you want to use. You know what? I'm going to save this other team for last, so this one is first. I had kind of run out of ideas by messing around with Pyro Traveler by this point, so I figured, why not make a traditional hypercarry team? It's not even really a hypercarry team because the main value that he provides is still holding scroll and giving 40% damage bonus to all the units who are actually dealing damage. And we also go to Maiden's Bennett. This is the worst thing. Like, this is the worst new thing that they've added. This is horrible. They, like, just reorganize all your artifacts to some fucking dumb priority of like, what is this? Why is this my #1 piece on Bennett? This is a team that is going to be, or at least Pyro Traveler's performance is going to be significantly affected by I did my rotation wrong because I'm just used to doing Emilie first. It's going to be significantly affected by you leveling your Pyro Traveler's normal attacks, which I have not done. And also by getting C6, which is impossible for a few months. I guess this kind of moves me on to saying I've been using Pyro Traveler mainly as just a generic support, and while they do deal damage, I don't think it's enough. Fully buff damage, yeah, I'm doing like 12,000 a hit. On a level 11 talent with Bennett buff, with Farina buff. This is a team where it's not great, but if you really want to use Traveler as a carry, I think that this is the best option. Actually, you know what? Yelan might just like kind of be crazy in this team. I feel kind of bad for not thinking about her at all. You know what? Okay, this team is actually kind of fun and crazy. Oh. What? Sure, I one-rotated it. I'm actually, unironically, really enjoying this team. Okay. Oh my god, that was a 112 burst that I just saw. That is like surprisingly a lot of fun. So yeah, I really do like Emilie, but sorry Emilie, Yelan is more fun than you. You get fun forward vapes with Farina and Yelan, and you get some reverse vapes to boost his damage with Traveler. Moving on to the final team that I've got here. This one took me by surprise. This is my current favorite Pyro Traveler team. This is yet another Traveler Ororon team, which well, it's different. It's very, very different. I can show you in a moment. That same base interaction is going off where Pyro Traveler is there to trigger Ororon's passive and let him deal some damage. And as you can see, he is the one holding Scroll of Cinder City in this team because Traveler is our full EM Gilded Dreams Burgeon trigger. Burgeon is sort of a haha funny joke. People don't really use Burgeon very much, and I thought of this team when hearing about Mavuika Burgeon, because Mavuika Burgeon is just not going to be very good. She has no ICD, so she applies more Pyro, but Burgeon seeds don't care about ICD. I realized that, okay, Pyro Traveler, with their Pyro application, with their automatic Pyro application that happens whenever enemies get close and pulses all around them, this character is the savior of Burgeon. Look at all this! Look at all this reaction damage! Before, I mentioned that Xingqiu is a character who has defensive utility, and that's not something to be ignored. It's not enough defensive utility to where I'm comfortable using only him, and the same thing can be said of, let me load in, Prototype Amber. Gives you a tiny bit of healing to your whole team on your burst, but it's not significant. Even though Burgeon is an archetype where you generally want to have a defensive option, because Bloom Cores deal damage to your characters when they explode. Because I've combined these two kind of okay defensive options, I feel very comfortable using them. If you're using the hold version of Traveler's Skill, which is what I would suggest because it hits more frequently and can trigger more Bloom Cores and Burgeon. The caveat is that you have to be standing near enemies for the application to actually go off. So even though I'm using someone like Nahida who has ranged attacks, I still have to get close to enemies for it to work. So yeah, I don't know. I think this team is pretty simple. It just is 3 characters that deal a decent amount of personal damage on their own, and I've also thrown a tiny bit of defensive utility in. And then the 4th character, who he's there to trigger Burgeons and activate Ororon. If someone wants to test this team out with Mavuika in place of PMC, you could, but what's interesting about this team is that this is actually something that I think Pyro Traveler has over Mavuika. He's better at doing this than Mavuika is. Because the tap version of his skill, the thing about it is that it hits every 1.5 seconds, but it only applies Pyro every other hit, 3 seconds. So Mavuika, who hits every 2 seconds and applies Pyro every hit, applies more Pyro and is generally going to be more usable in Pyro reaction teams. But her application is, well, number 1, you can't control the positioning of it, whereas Pyro Traveler's application follows him no matter where he goes. And number 2, Burgeon Cores aren't affected by ICD because they can only be hit once by either Electro or Pyro before they activate. Pyro Traveler with his skill will be able to trigger Burgeon Cores every 1.5 seconds on an AoE that follows him around, whereas Mavuika she only hits every 2 seconds and she can't control where the AoE is. It just happens automatically. So yeah, that's it from me. Pyro Traveler, he's nothing crazy, but I think he's more than good enough to slot into a lot of different teams. More importantly, I think that there are some interesting things that you can do with his kit. This is not the last you'll see of the Pyro Traveler from me. I'm gonna try to make him work in some Citlali teams once I get her. If you like this one, you can leave a like. If you like me, you can subscribe. And I hope y'all have a lovely day.